Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I'm sure glad you're here. Currently, there is a lot of discussion in the legal community about whether or not teenagers should be tried as adults for murder. I myself have a difficult time with this question, as science tells us the teenaged brain is not capable of fully understanding long-term consequences for actions. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and considering consequences, is not completely capable of consistently weighing and comprehending the full impact of long-term consequences until later in life. Even with that knowledge and understanding, we see some cases sometimes, like the one I covered a few weeks ago called the baby-faced monster, where I truly believe it is in the best interest of society for a teenager to be locked up for the rest of their life. But is that always what's best, even when a teenager intentionally murders another person? That's the question. Keep that question in the back of your mind during today's story. Today we are talking about Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham, who are thought to be Britain's youngest double murderers. This is the story of the Twilight killers. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Our story begins in Spalding, Lincolnshire, England. Spalding is a beautiful little town that's a mix of old and new. There are historic buildings and churches in the area, and many of the homes date back over a century. But there are also modern shopping spaces and malls, and there's a beautiful river called the River Welland, as well as a waterway called Vernat's Drain that runs through the town where people take boats as water taxis and spend time on the riverbanks. There are about 40,000 people in Spalding, and a lot of them work in farming. In 2015, two 14-year-old lovers were deep in a relationship, an obsession, really. And they were Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham. I'm going to state right off the bat that these cases from European countries are more difficult to cover because, one, I don't have local access to news sites or people with firsthand information. But two, and more importantly, Europe is a lot more careful about the information they allow to be published at all, whether they're teenagers involved or not. When I research a case here, I find information about the perpetrator and the victims' lives, their personalities, their interests, their school. But in most European countries, they have a greater reverence for privacy, at least for private citizens, and that does make it more difficult to find information. So here is what I was able to find out about Kim Edwards. At the beginning of 2015, Kim's mother, Elizabeth Edwards, arranged an emergency psychiatric appointment for Kim after discovering an unaliving note left by Kim. Kim went to see a psychiatrist. The doctor assessed her and did not feel that Kim had any sort of mental illness. And here I'm going to speculate based on statements made later on by Kim. I think there is a good possibility she is a psychopath. Psychopathy is not a mental illness, it's a personality disorder. And as we know, sociopaths and psychopaths are very good at hiding their disorder, and they're also very good at manipulating other people, which can include professionals. It's not a clinical diagnosis, it's part of the group of antisocial personality disorders. Psychopaths cannot feel empathy, and they cannot put themselves in other people's shoes. And as you will see later on, this is why I say Kim might be a psychopath. Kim continued to have struggles at home. She had a deep hatred for her mother and her younger sister, Katie, who was only 13 years old. One article I read said Kim showed, quote, utter contempt for her mother and her sister. This was not a happy home. Clear back in 2008, Elizabeth Edwards struck her daughter Kim when she was only about 6 years old. Elizabeth immediately recognized that she had done something wrong, and she called social services on herself to report what she had done. Both Kim and Katie were removed from the home home and placed in a care home for several months. The girls were eventually returned to their mother, but Elizabeth told the social worker during follow-up visits that she felt Kim had not forgiven her for striking her. There was another incident in 2013 when Elizabeth Edwards reported she and Kim had a string of arguments and that there seemed to be one problem after another. That September, Elizabeth told Kim's teachers at school that her daughter was planning on running away and to help her keep an eye on her. It doesn't appear that Kim did ever run away for an extended period of time, and in 2014, Elizabeth reported to the same teachers that her relationship with Kim had improved. Then, in January of 2015, Kim made a report to social workers telling them that her mother had tried to strangle her. The social workers paid a visit to the house. Elizabeth and Katie both vehemently denied that this ever took place. They said Elizabeth did not try to strangle Kim. Kim was making it up to get Elizabeth in trouble. Hard to know who to believe there. Elizabeth then went to the doctor and asked for a referral to family therapy. Only days later, Elizabeth arranged that emergency psychiatric appointment after discovering the note written by Kim. Psychiatric professionals intervened, and for a few months, things seemed to improve. Part of it was because Kim was distracted. In May of 2015, Kim began her relationship with Lucas Markham. Lucas was a 14-year-old boy in the area. The two were absolutely obsessed with each other. Elizabeth disapproved from the relationship from the very beginning. She thought both Kim and Lucas were much too young to be in such a serious relationship, and Elizabeth also knew they were having sex. There was a lot of fighting in the house surrounding Lucas and how much time Kim was spending with him. And then in October of 2015, Kim and Lucas ran away together. The authorities searched for the couple for 6 days before finding them sleeping in the woods north of Spalding. After this incident, Elizabeth barred Lucas from her home. He was not allowed inside at all. Kim and Lucas began meeting in the backyard of the home, which Elizabeth tolerated to some degree, but she told a friend of hers, "Those two are a time bomb waiting to go off." Kim was still under the care of a psychiatrist whom she told, "My life is a living, walking hell." Kim also tried to end her life by taking pills once. Some people involved believed this was kind of a cry for help. Others believed she was serious. Christmas came and went, and the troubles continued. In the beginning of 2016, Kim and Lucas began to form a very dark and evil plan, and no one but them knew what they had in store. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham have decided that, in true Romeo and Juliet fashion, they are going to exact revenge on the person who has been keeping them apart, Kim's mother, Elizabeth. They've decided they are also going to kill 13-year-old Katie because Kim was jealous of the relationship that she had with the mother she hates. Kim would later divulge that the relationship was a triangle she felt very much left out of. Kim believed her mother was much more attached to her sister Katie than she was to Kim. The plan was to murder Elizabeth and Katie, and then after that, Kim and Lucas were going to overdose on pills. Kim left a note that read, "You world, I want to be cremated and want our ashes scattered in a special place." Kim and Lucas had the very adolescent notion that because Elizabeth was trying to keep them apart, she deserved to die. Kim's jealousy was more of a factor than she initially let on. The plan began as what Lucas initially believed to be a joke. He made some flippant comments about killing Elizabeth and Katie, and then the idea began to settle into Kim's head. She began to talk more and more about ending it all after taking her family members' lives, and soon Lucas realized Kim wasn't joking at all. Lucas soon told Kim that he was no longer joking, and that it all escalated from there. On April 9th, Elizabeth and Kim had an argument during which Elizabeth said to Kim, "You're going to turn out just like your father." Kim's father abandoned the family when Kim was just 2 years old, so this was particularly offensive to Kim. She stormed out of the house and went to Lucas's home. Kim and Lucas then barricaded themselves in Lucas's room for the night. When Kim went home the next day, Elizabeth had bagged up some of Kim's possessions and given other items to Katie. Kim would later say, "I felt like I didn't belong to the family anymore." This seemed to be the real tipping point for Kim and Lucas, and they decided that it was time to make their awful move. On April 13th, 2016, Kim let Lucas into the house through this bathroom window. Lucas brought with him a bag of knives. Lucas took one of the knives he brought and crept into Elizabeth Edwards' bedroom. Elizabeth was sleeping on her side. Lucas crept up on Elizabeth and stabbed her twice in the throat. Elizabeth woke up and began trying to scream. Lucas then grabbed a pillow and smothered Elizabeth to stop the screaming while he stabbed her 8 additional times. Lucas then went into Katie's room and stabbed her twice in the neck as well. In Lucas's own words, quote, "I went into Katie's room, which is the same room as Kim's, and I thought I stabbed her, but I'm not 100% sure. I was like her on a mattress, and then I smothered her face with a pillow too." It's just, these are kids. The reason the couple felt they needed to kill Katie is so she wouldn't call the police. After committing 2 murders, that of her own mother and 13-year-old sister, Kim went to the kitchen and took some ice cream from the freezer. She and Lucas then laid down on a mattress in the living room. They had sex just after the murders, and then they turned on the movie Twilight and ate ice cream. They loved the Twilight movies because they saw themselves as Edward and Bella, teenage loves who were pulled apart by forces they couldn't control, yet they remained devoted to each other. Well, Edward doesn't murder Bella's family in the movie, guys. For the next day and a half, Kim and Lucas stayed inside Kim's house. They were reported missing from school, and a police officer was sent to the house. As the cop knocked on the door, the couple stayed very quiet inside, so he would believe no one was there. Lucas's aunt came to the house looking for Lucas. Again, the couple stayed quiet to avoid detection. After the first day, with no one able to get Elizabeth on the phone, the police decided to get more aggressive. About 36 hours after the murders, police arrived back at the Edwards house and broke in through a downstairs window. There, they discovered the teenaged couple hiding inside, along with the bodies of Elizabeth and Katie. PC Alastair Pullen, the first officer to enter the house, said that he asked where Elizabeth was, and Lucas, quote, looked at me clean in the eye and said, "Why don't you go up and see?" No remorse and no fear. The no fear thing scares me. When the police discovered what the children had done, they were, of course, shocked. The knife used to murder Elizabeth and Katie was sitting right here, out in the open on a nightstand in Kim's room. It's still covered with blood. Neither Kim nor Lucas made any attempt to dispose of it. Even more shocking was the cavalier attitude of both Kim and Lucas. Detective Chief Inspector Martin Halvey led the murder investigation and would later tell the press, quote, "The actual after effects are probably the most chilling. The fact of what happened in those 36 hours afterwards and how they carried on as normal, watching TV, watching Twilight, going upstairs to use the toilet while people are lying upstairs dead. It beggars belief." Kim and Lucas were arrested and taken into custody, and there, an already horrific story gets even worse. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham are placed in separate interview rooms. There, Kim begins to coldly, without any emotion, explain what happened the night of the murders. Kim told investigators he, meaning Lucas, was on top of her with a, pillow over her head, even though her voice box was and then she trails off. Lucas, in the other room, is just as cold and emotionless as he tells police his version of what happened. He says, "I went into her mom's room, stabbed her in the neck while she was asleep on her side, and smothered her face with a pillow. And after I knew she was gone, I went into Katie's room and..." The police sat stunned. The word I read was actually flabbergasted at not only the cold manner in which these children told the stories, but also at the fact that they'd made absolutely no attempt to run, to hide the bodies, to try and get away. They couldn't understand what they had been thinking. Of course, they said their plan was to take their own lives after the murders, but afterwards they were enjoying their time together, unattended, with no one telling them they couldn't see each other, they had to go to school, or anything like that. In her interview, Kim told investigators, this is really, really chilling. Kim says, "I was okay with it. Just the fact that it happened so quickly, that gave me peace of mind because it wasn't torture or anything." How do kids get this far off track this early in life? It is actually terrifying to me. Murdering someone is okay as long as you don't torture them. This is why I say a psychopath. Kim then said she did not regret the murders at all. One of the investigators asked Kim if she was glad her mother was dead, and Kim responded, quote, "Yes, because my mom doesn't have to deal with me anymore, being like, suicidal, and she doesn't have to wake up worrying every morning to see if I'm still alive. My sister doesn't have to go through all the heartbreak and all the emotions and stuff." So, yeah. She orchestrated the murder of her mother and her little sister because she cared so much about their emotions. Got it. A forensic psychiatrist named Philip Joseph was brought in on the case. He said, if the two hadn't got together and had the intense toxic relationship, the murders would never have happened. This is clearly a planned, controlled killing. There is control all the way through it. Bonnie and Clyde, that sort of intense attraction, emotional closeness, them against the world. It's that sort of thing that led on to this. Both Kim and Lucas went on trial on October 10th, 2016 in the Crown Court at Nottingham before J. Haddon Cave. Lucas Markham, then 15 years old, pled guilty on the rearrangement of 2 counts of murder. Kim admitted to 2 counts of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. Kim's defense brought in a psychiatrist, Dr. Indranil Chakrabarti, and he stated that Kim had an adjustment disorder and long-standing attachment issues as a result of her strained relationship with her mother. He said this disorder was brought on by a series of stressful events, including Lucas being expelled from school after they ran away, and Kim's attempt to end her own life. Kim's defense attorneys and her psychiatrist's arguments were rejected, and Kim was forced to stand trial. On October 18th, 2016, Kim was convicted on both charges of manslaughter. Kim's father attended the trial and was seen avoiding reporters as he left the courthouse. Sounds to me like he's good at avoiding things. I'm sorry, I just have a real problem with people who abandon their families. And I'm incapable of keeping my opinions to myself.
Liz and Katie Edwards, a mother and her daughter, killed as they slept by murderers aged just 14.
You're not videoing this, are you?
In happier times, celebrating Christmas at home, the school dinner lady, whose daughter, just 13, died in the bedroom next to hers. Today, a jury returned guilty verdicts on 2 charges of murder.
What makes this case even more shocking is that these 2 were 14 years of age when they planned, committed these callous, senseless and unprovoked attacks on Elizabeth and Katie.
The killers can't be named for legal reasons, but it was the boy who brought a knife to the rear of this house as part of a plot hatched days before. The plan they agreed was for the boy to go to the house armed and in secret. On 3 consecutive nights he walked along this lonely riverside path with a bag of knives. On the first 2 nights he was unable to gain access to the house. On the 3rd night he managed to climb through an open window. This was the window through which he entered, and once he'd climbed inside this house, 5 Dawson Avenue, he moved through the property, armed with one of the knives and looking for the bedrooms of his victims. It was late at night, and they hadn't been woken by his entry. When the killer found the mother and daughter in their separate rooms, they were still asleep. He held the knife, but of the girl, the prosecution said that she was the driver of the conspiracy, that brutality and contempt oozes from every pore. Together with her young boyfriend, they planned and carried out cold, calculated and callous killings. Katie's father was in court to hear how her killers had a bath and watched television afterwards, leaving their murder weapon lying in the young girl's bedroom. In her police interview, the teenage girl described the killings as a breeze and said she felt fine. "I'd felt like murdering for quite a while," she added. "I was okay with it. Just the fact that it happened so quickly gave me peace of mind." But what happened to Liz has shocked the rest of the community where she lived.
She was very thoughtful. She understood how she could help people. She didn't just turn up. She was there and thinking about what was needed.
The couple who killed this mother and daughter made a pact to take their own lives afterwards, but instead ate ice cream and watched television, and are now no longer a couple. They each face a life behind bars. Damon Green, News at 10, Nottingham Crown Court.
On November 10th, 2016, Judge Haddon Cave sentenced both Kim and Lucas be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure and ordered in both cases that the minimum term should be 20 years, less the 206 days spent awaiting trial. In the spring of 2017, both defendants filed an appeal. The court reviewed all of the evidence again, and it is then that we learned some additional information. Kim and Lucas had specifically planned to stab both Elizabeth and Katie through the neck in order to destroy their vocal cords to prevent screaming. That's a very chilling detail and tells you how much they thought about this and how seriously they took this. The appeal also details very graphically the way Lucas pinned Elizabeth and then Katie down as he stabbed them, and there are also details about the bloodiness of the crime scene. These kids didn't walk in and shoot their victims. This was a horrific, physical, graphic murder. In the appeal, the court also details the way Lucas removed the pillow from each victim's head and checked their pulse to make sure they were dead. We learned that during Elizabeth's attack, she fought back, scratching Lucas on the face, the back, and the backside. After about 3 minutes, Elizabeth stopped struggling and went limp. And I think this is such a good reminder of something that I say that makes me very unpopular with my ultra-left feminist friends. I'm a feminist. I think we should all be feminists. But then you have feminists who just want to deny reality and truths. And one of those realities and truths is that even a 14-year-old boy is stronger than an adult woman. Facts are facts, and we do facts here. Women do not have the physical strength to fight a man, not even a teenaged boy. This is why it's so important to take self-defense classes to learn techniques in case you're ever attacked, using your elbows and not your hands or fists, and most importantly, using your legs as much as possible. A woman's legs are much more likely to be stronger than a man's upper body. Upper body to upper body, women are not as strong as men. So I know I say this a lot, please learn self-defense techniques. Now that said, being attacked in your sleep with someone who already has the upper hand, I don't know that there's anything poor Elizabeth could have done, and Katie didn't have a chance. The whole thing just makes me feel sick. Also in this appeal, we learned that Lucas had a history of violence before the murders. He would punch and headbutt the walls and doors within the family home, causing damage to the house. There were physical fights between Lucas and his younger brother, and this is why he was living with his aunt, the same aunt who went looking for Lucas when he didn't show up at school the day after the murders. Lucas had also engaged in self-harming behaviors. Now, let's talk about Lucas's parents, because they were also engaged in domestic violence towards each other. Lucas never got along with his father, who was a heavy drinker. His father apparently admitted that he was a neglectful parent. And of course, this matters in the discussion as to how people like Lucas and Kim are made. You're well aware we see this all the time. Children from homes that are neglectful, abusive, where there's drug abuse, alcohol abuse, they often grow up to be violent. And we need to study this. The judge who oversaw the trial and then the appeal stated, quote, "People who know the full facts of this case may struggle to comprehend how you both could have committed this terrible and unnatural crime, which has devastated two families and a community. The answer lies partly, in my view, in what Dr. Joseph described as your toxic relationship." The judge continued, "You were, in my view, in a hermetically sealed, pathetic world of your own, of deep, deep selfishness and immaturity, where only your feelings and desires matter and nobody else's. I sentence you as children, which you are. I sentence based on hope for you and for society rather than in the expectation of failure." I think the judge states the sentiments we all share. We all want to believe that somebody is going to turn their life around. Do we see that? Sometimes. And this, much like the story I brought you a few weeks ago, is such a case study in the question that we ask all the time. Are killers born or are they made? Most of the time, I believe it is a mixture, and that has a very wide spectrum of variables. Most of the time. You know, I do not believe in evil, at least not the supernatural kind. But then you have people like Gavin Ramsey, who by all accounts is from a nice family with loving parents. No family is perfect, but his family seems genuinely kind and loving. Still, Gavin went on to do some of the most disturbing and grotesque things I've personally ever heard of. And not only did he commit murder and other terrible acts, as a child, he committed them against a 98-year-old woman. I think the story of Gavin Ramsey is a great case study for those who believe some people are just born bad. In this case, we have both Kim and Lucas who had some pretty major problems at home. Neither got along with their parents. Lucas's father drank too much. Kim's mother was someone who was having a difficult time attaching to her daughter. And then you have this thing that tips these kids over the edge. A meeting of two unbalanced people, folie à deux, which I believe means madness of two. Would Kim or Lucas on their own have become dangerous killers without their meeting? We will never know. We do know that their relationship was deadly and that they seemed to be remorseless. I find it interesting that this crime is considered so heinous that the juveniles' names were released to the press and the public. That doesn't usually happen in England. In what is called a lifting of the naming ban, the court allowed the kids to be named, stating it was impossible to protect their anonymity. So what was the outcome of the appeal? Both Kim and Lucas had their sentences reduced from 20 years to 17 and a half years. They are very, very fortunate they live in the UK and not here in the States. They would most likely never see the outside of a prison if this took place here in the States. And yet, we see how well that is working. It's really not. I don't have the answers. All I know is that it is imperative that we continue to discuss these cases, that we keep them alive in our memories, not only to remember the victims, but to study the killers in order to learn how they are made and what motivates them. It is the only hope we have of preventing violence in the future. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I really appreciate you guys. A special thank you to my patrons. Your support means everything to me. As you know, I've got two podcasts. This one is called Dining with Death, and this one is the current podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I post brand new episodes every Monday and every Wednesday, and you will hear some stories on Dark Hearts that you will not see here on YouTube. As you know, our community is in the midst of a perpetual fundraiser. If you watch this short little video here on the channel, it will explain what we're doing and how you can donate a few bucks to possibly help us solve some cold crimes. I hope you're doing well, my friends. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.